Welcome to Studio Stories. My name is Billy Hume. I'm going to go back and I'm going to discuss a little bit how I got into music originally. I was living in Germany at the time, and my mom wanted me to take piano lessons, and this was like in the mid-'70s when piano was not cool. So we were walking through this building where there was a nightclub. It was during the day, the nightclub was closed, and as my mom's saying to me, "Hey, I'm thinking you should take piano lessons," I happened to look to my left, and there was a door ajar, and there was a janitor cleaning up this nightclub, and up on the stage was a drum kit with some cool purple lights on it. And I remember looking at that and thinking, like, drums are cool. I'd rather play drums. So I said, "Mama, can I play drums instead?" And she said, "Sure." So I started taking drum lessons. And I did that for a couple years, and I got in a couple bands, but I quickly learned that I had a lot of ideas about music, but nobody wanted to listen to the drummer. So I decided, well, I want to have my ideas heard, so I switched to guitar. So I went and got a cheap little guitar, and after my first lesson, the first thing I did was come home, and I started recording after my first guitar lesson. I had 2 cassette decks. I would record a guitar part onto one cassette deck, then I'd hook that cassette deck up to another one, and put a mic in, and I would play along with the first recording and overdub with the microphone onto the second cassette deck, and I'd just kind of keep ping-ponging back and forth to create compositions and production. It didn't work out that good because if the speed of the tape isn't perfect on both of them, it'll tend to generally slow down or speed up depending on which direction you go. But that got me interested in recording. So when I was 15 years old, I wanted to buy an actual reel-to-reel tape machine. So I talked my mom into co-signing a loan for me, and for $800, I bought a TIAC 3340S, which is a huge reel-to-reel machine, which I still own, and I could record 4 tracks on it, reel-to-reel, and I had it modified to run at 15 IPS. So I used that for years, just overdubbing like the Beatles did, and recorded that way for years, and just really got into it. And during that whole time, I had bands. I was out playing gigs and trying to be a rock star and all that kind of stuff. But I was really, really inspired by recording. I was actually most affected by Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, which I thought was the epitome of a great record. And to this day, I'm still trying to achieve something that can come anywhere close to the artistry and production and commercial success of that record. I actually lost my virginity listening to that record. Just thought I'd throw that in there. But I continued to play with bands and continued to have little studios and basements and stuff like that. But there was some point where I realized that A, I wasn't making much money with my bands, and B, that I could make more money in the studio, and C, everybody kept calling me up for my studio work. I was getting way more interest for my studio work than anything I was doing live. So I kind of really just dove into that, and I bought a house near Atlanta, and I built a studio in the basement. And I had I had my 4-track, I had a little 8-track, and I once again talked to my parents into co-signing a loan, but a bigger one this time, and I bought myself a 16-track Tascam MS-16, which I used for years and years and years. So I used that 16-track machine. And I found this house where I could build a studio. It had a cool driveway that kind of came around back, and I just slowly built this thing out. And I worked in that studio for years, part-time at night, and I painted houses during the day and did remodeling work and carpentry to support myself, thinking, you know, someday maybe I'll hit it big. And, you know, I just probably did that for 10 years. And then one day I was contacted by a guy, just a phone call from a local ad I had in the paper, like, "Hey, come do some studio work." And this guy was actually an air conditioner repairman who was trying to get into the music business, and he actually called me up to ask about microphones. He didn't actually want to book studio time, so I was trying to get him off the phone, but he kept calling me and bugging me, and then he invited himself over to the studio, and he's just like really kind of a pain in the ass. But he kind of came in one day and looked around my home studio, and he said, "You could make $1 million out of this basement." And I was like, what? What's he talking about? Now you got to remember, this was the early 90s. This was back before computerized recording. This is before, you know, people had studios in their homes. I mean, I had one in my home, but it wasn't like, you know, a real studio. But he just had this weird look in his eye and this kind of thing about him that I actually believed him. So he had some advice for me that I should fix it up and I should do this and this. And I thought, hey, it's not a bad idea. I'll do that. So I got my motorcycle. I used to park my motorcycle in the studio. So I quit parking my motorcycle in the studio and I cleaned it all up. And then the same guy came back to me one day and he said, you know, someday rap music's going to be huge. And I was like, get out of here, man. Because at that time, it wasn't. It wasn't like a big mainstream type of music. I just thought he was just crazy when he said that. But he kept telling me that and he kept coming around. And then one day he said, hey, we should do a compilation of rap artists, an album with rap artists from around Atlanta. And he had a compelling enough pitch to me that I decided, the hell, what else am I going to do? Might as well do it, you know? So he brought a bunch of people over, and these were just guys that he knew from around Atlanta. And there was like, Bone Crusher was part of this crew, Little John, a group called Phenomena Good Song. There was another guy whose name now escapes me. He went by a different name back then. But anyway, we did this little rap record, and I didn't know anything about rap music at all. I just heard it, the boom sound coming out of cars that drove by. But one thing I did figure out quickly is that these people that he brought over, all these artists, were like some of the coolest people I'd ever met in my life. And also that they were allowing me to do something that none of my clients would ever let me do, and that was to make really big explosive drums. Like all my clients up to that point were just kind of like part-time musicians, people playing in local bands. You make, oh, I'm gonna do a record, but nobody that really understood art, understood making records, but people that weren't really 100% trying to have a career. But when I started working with these rappers, these guys were damn serious about having a career because they wanted to get out of where they lived, and they were some of the most motivated, professional, and hardworking people I ever met. Now, at first, that's not what I thought. I just saw a bunch of guys with gold teeth and talking kind of crazy, and it kind of scared the shit out of me. But then it's like, wow, they're kind of cool, man. These guys are kind of cool. And so I jumped into this thing. Now, the compilation we did failed. And financially, it was really bad for me because I was putting up the studio time and helping pay for stuff. But those recordings got around town, and I didn't realize that Bone Crusher and Little John knew all these people. They weren't famous at the time. I think Little John was probably doing A&R work for So Def at the time, and Bone was, co-writing with people, but he was just, always bumming money off me to buy groceries on the way home, and that dude knows how to stretch $10 like nobody you would ever believe. But I started getting calls for work because of this compilation record. Everybody heard what I did and my mixing and all that, and they liked my studio. So I just started getting more and more rap work. I was also starting to get more work working with some rock producers and stuff like that. But there was this one moment where I just realized where the music industry was going. I was just reading a lot of trade magazines and paying attention to things, and just something clicked in my head, and I realized rap music is going to be huge. And these guys I'm working with are going to be huge. I don't know how I knew this. It was just one of these things that happens to me once in a while. I have these flashes of, I don't know what you call them, prophecies. My dad used to have these too. So I quit everything else I was doing. And I literally lost friends over this. People thought I was crazy because at the time, I was playing mandolin. And I was playing like singer-songwriter places like Eddie's Attic, or I was going to the Bluebird Cafe and all that and singing my weird little songs about elves and angels and stuff like that. So I'm jumping from that straight into rap music. And I dropped everything else and worked with Little John, constantly for like a year and a half or something like that, and started working with Bone Crusher. And Little John was getting his first big solo record ready, and I was getting married around then. And my wife and I were going to go on a week-and-a-half long honeymoon on the motorcycle. And Little John asked if he could get his ADAT tapes to finish the record. We were recording on ADATs. Hopefully some of y'all know what an ADAT is. It's a tape system for recording music. So I got all the tapes, and they gave them to Little John, and I was like, hey, man, good luck with the record and all that, and we went off on our honeymoon. But partway through the honeymoon, I got a call from Little John, and he said, hey, man, the stuff sounds so good, I'm going to wait for you to get back. I'm going to book you for a month straight. When you get back from your day after you get back from your honeymoon, I need you for a month straight. I was like, cool, great. So I hung up the phone, told my wife, hey, I'm booked for a month straight and get back. Next day, he called me back again. He said, hey, man, I got a friend. His name is DJ Smurf. That's what he went by back then. We call him Cauley Park now. He said, I got a friend named DJ Smurf. He's got a group called the Yin Yang Twins. They have a single called Whistle While You Twerk, and it needs to be remixed. And they need it done quickly. I'm going to give him my first day that I booked with you. I want you to give that to him. And by the way, he's on the phone. Say hi to DJ Smurf. So that's how I met him. And so the day I got back from my honeymoon, the day after I got back from my honeymoon, I had Yin Yang Twins in the studio. Next day, Little John for a month straight. And then I was working with Bone. And for the next 10 years, I pretty much just did rap music and had a lot of hit records and a lot of crazy experiences. And then at a certain point, I remembered that I'd not intended to do rap music for 10 years. So I kind of shifted another direction. Also, the music business was going downhill at that point in time. Sales were going down. I could see my royalties dropping off for record sales and all that. So there was a 2-year period where my income dropped 80%. And I realized I needed to look at a different business model because rap music pretty much depended on album sales to make money. So I started looking at groups that tour and sell albums on the road and have a good touring base. So I moved into bluegrass and country and stuff like that. And since then, I've been kind of like just mostly working with independent artists and writing for people and developing artists and doing some film scoring work as well. So that's the quick storyline there. So now I should talk about, I'm going to talk a little about being out in the studio with Lil Jon. I used to think that I was a really hard worker until I started working with Lil Jon. I used to think that if somebody came in the studio and we worked for 6 hours, it's like, whew, boy, we really worked hard. Man, Lil Jon would come in the studio and we would work. It'd be 3 or 4 in the morning and we're still running out to the car to check mixes and go back and tweak them out, and then we'd be back in there the next day and the next day and the next day. And I realized, I think one of the biggest things that I got from working on rap music was an idea of work ethic, but also an idea of what the success myth in music is and how that's different for different types of people. See, the way I grew up, there's a success myth that is that's this story about a bunch of guys in a band, and they get together in a basement, and they're all best buddies, and they write some songs, and then they go out and they play a bar, and they get discovered, and somebody goes, I'm going to sign you to a deal, and they put them in a limo and an airplane, they fly them off, and it's all happily ever after. And that's what I was pursuing for years. It obviously never happened, and later on I realized it practically never happens. But in the rap world, in the hip-hop world, the success myth is a lot different. In that story, you got a guy who raps and a guy who makes beats, and they get in the basement and they make some music, and then they go sell that music out of the trunk of the car, and they take the profits from that and invest it in more gear and marketing and other things, and then they take that money and reinvest it into the business. And I realized that the success myth in rap music is based on an actual business model and hard work. It doesn't get so wrapped up in your identity or your ego artistically. I'll give you an example of one of the things that I learned from working on rap music on how they looked at doing music differently. When I first started doing rap records, there oftentimes people would be writing in the studio, and I would look around and I would see 4 different guys writing a hook. And one of the guys might be in the group, somebody might be a buddy, and somebody might be Little Bo from Mississippi, who just shown up that day and nobody knew him. And I just remember thinking early on, like, what the hell are they doing? Like, you can't have everybody writing a hook. This is chaos. Like, you know, there should be one guy in charge. You know, he's the dictator, the benevolent dictator. But I realized that these guys weren't getting so wrapped up in who wrote it. They only cared about, was it the best thing? They only cared about winning. And that was a really hard thing for me to absorb and understand, because I came from a background of music being art and being tied to my identity and being tied to my ego and also my lifestyle and a million other things. But after a while, I realized that looking at it this way was actually quite liberating. I didn't have to take myself so seriously. I could just have fun. It's all right to just make a catchy song. We can just be catchy? We can just do something for fun? Wow, that's a crazy idea. Because in the past, I felt like I was working so hard to make things complicated. And, listen how complicated that is. He's going from a 3/4 to a 5/4, 3/4 to 2/4 time signature. Pfft, nobody can dance to that stuff. At the end of the day, people just want to be able to tap their foot and sing along. It's as simple as that. And if you can accomplish that, then you're good. If you can add something artistic on top of that, that's cool too. But don't ever forget that at the end of the day, it's just about tapping your foot and singing along. I think one of the reasons I struggled for so long without having success is because I was kind of putting all my eggs into one basket. I had my band and my ex-wife's band and a few clients. And I was working so hard on just a handful of songs, thinking like these are the best songs ever, which is kind of how you need to think about things, because if you don't think your songs are the best in the world, well, probably not going to succeed. But at the same time, you also got to realize, well, maybe there's somebody else better out there. But I was just putting all my eggs into one basket. And then it was actually a friend of mine that I was working with at the time, a producer named Rick Beato, who's now a big YouTube guy. And I was working with him at the time, and he said to me, he said, Billy, it's a numbers game. You got to do a lot of work, because most of it's going to fail. And I listened to him. And you know what? It's true, because if I was to show you my discography right now, it's pretty impressive. I've got 2 pages of hit albums. But what a lot of people don't realize is that's maybe 5% or less of what I've done in my career. Most of what I've done has failed. And that's how this business works. Most of what you do is going to fail. So you'd better do a lot of it so that that one little thing that works can hopefully take you somewhere. And hopefully you'll recognize that that's the thing right there. So just remember, don't get disappointed. Being in the music business is about being humiliated and insulted every single day. I mean, seriously, it's gonna happen. I don't care how successful you are, every single day, something like that's gonna happen. You just gotta move on. Another thing that was really important for me was, as I said earlier, not taking myself too seriously. I used to fight for things tooth and nail, every little harmony, every little beat, chord change, whatever. And you know, it's kind of my job as a producer to do that. But I realized, it took me years to realize this, that sometimes I was just pissing people off. And that you actually need to learn how to get along with people, which I'm not always so great at. But it was actually Collie Park who said to me one time, he said, Billy, anybody will work with you if you just had a hit or you got a song going up the charts. But they'll continue to work with you for years if they like you. Because if they don't like you, after your song goes down, nobody's going to be returning your phone calls. So just remember, be kind, treat people good. Music business is a small business. And if you're an asshole or you're cheating people or lying to them, trust me, everybody will eventually find out. One of the things that was really important for me that helped develop me as a producer and a mixer was that I was in bands for years. And it wasn't just my own bands doing my own music. I played in cover bands. I spent a few years playing in really cheesy lounges at Holiday Inns. I had a gig in Midway, Georgia in the early 80s, playing at like a Days Inn lounge. I played in a bar connected to a bowling alley in Brunswick, Georgia in the early 80s, just doing cover songs. And we would do, oh my God, we had the worst uniforms. I mean, it was so cheesy. But we'd play a ZZ Top song, then we'd do a Michael Jackson song, and then a Shalimar song, or then we'd do something from Flashdance. And every week we'd go down the record store, whatever town we were in, and look at the Billboard charts and pick 2 songs from the top 10, and I had to learn them and play them as best as I could for these little bars that we were playing. And I did that because I wanted to get out of the house. I love touring and I love being out on the road. I would prefer to play better venues, but I loved being out there. It was the closest thing to me to being an outlaw with actually being an outlaw. And, but years later, I was able to pull all this in and have it help my production because it helped me understand a lot of different types of music. And it never really struck me till years later. I was working with a group called the Infamous String Dusters. I was working on my first album with them, and we were in a studio in Nashville, and we'd done a take on a song, and the whole band records live together. They'll overdub the vocals, but the whole band is playing the whole song from the beginning to the end. And I needed to go tell everybody in the band one thing before we did the next take. Like I needed to tell somebody like, hey, maybe hit this part harder, or you should like play higher up on the neck here. I can't even remember what it was, but I did have one thing to say to everybody. And I remember as I was leaving the control room and walking into the studio where everybody was set up with their gobos and all that, I had this flash where I actually knew for a split second how I knew all those things, how I knew to tell somebody to shift their position on the mic or to play at a different place or to do something different. I actually, for that moment, had this crazy clarity where I actually knew why I knew these things. And then I forgot it all. But I know it's in there. So, you know, I always tell people, try to expand, listen to different types of music. You should try this as well if you're a music producer or into music. And this was another thing that somebody told me once. And when he said it to me, I was kind of shocked. I said, quit listening to your favorite music for a year. Don't listen to your favorite music for a year. Cut that out. Just listen to stuff that's popular, whether you like it or not. Forget that you don't like it. Listen to stuff and take away your judgment. I was lucky enough to interview Jimmy Douglas once. He's a very famous mixer and producer. And he said something to me. He'd been working with, I think he'd worked with Led Zeppelin and Foreigner and all that, and he was living in Virginia Beach. And Missy Elliott and Timbaland were actually kids in his neighborhood that knew he had a studio in his house, and they'd come around and bug him. And he didn't know anything about rap music. He said they would play him this music, and he thought it was just terrible. He said, like, that's not what a snare drum sounds like. That sounds like somebody hitting like a milk can with a stick. I mean, that's not a snare drum, because he had come from an age where a snare drum was a nice black beauty with a lot of low end. That's what a snare drum sounds like. But he said he really liked these kids, and he said one day he just decided to throw away everything he knew about what music should sound like and just pretend he didn't know anything. And it was a really cool thing for him to say, and I thought a lot about that when you're working with different people or you want to expand your musical knowledge, the best thing to do is kind of forget everything that you know sometimes. Just pretend you don't know anything. Just pretend you're a baby. Just pretend you're a baby with a stick or something and you're just hitting stuff and making noise and just liking it without any judgment. It's one of the best ways to have a great artistic breakthrough. I often have people ask me how I get a certain sound. Now, I certainly have a lot of mixing tricks. Some of that I put out on my YouTube channel, Freaking Out with Billy Hume, and I show some of that. Some of that I keep secret. But I think the key to what I'm doing that's more important than anything is usually all the stuff that's happening before I ever set a mic up, before anything goes into a microphone. I feel that one of the most important things is for an artist, when they're recording, to be in the right setting. Now, you'll often hear people say, well, I want to make sure that the artist is comfortable. And sometimes that's totally true. But let me tell you, sometimes it's really important for the artist to be incredibly uncomfortable or angry or a little insecure. Kind of depends on the person. I think the setting is everything. And I'm usually willing to try almost anything with an artist as well. I'll try the craziest ideas, because some of the best stuff I've learned is from people who didn't know a damn thing about recording, coming up with the dumbest ideas, and then me going, well, what the heck, let's try it, and going, wow, that actually really did work. But I feel like being prepared is really important. Making sure the setting is right, making sure that I understand what they want, because I can make almost any kind of record, but it's like, what do they want and why are they making a recording? I think motivation is everything. Some people are making records because they just want to have success, and that's totally fine. So it's like, okay, let's look at, you know, what kind of record they're making, what artists are out there. Let's look at those kind of records, see what they sound like. Some people are doing it more for artistic reasons, and that's cool, and I want to know that. But I think it's very important for everybody to be honest about it, because I've had bands come in and say, oh, we're doing it for the art. I'm like, cool, so we're going to do 15-minute long songs, no problem. And then when I'm mixing the album, they're like, hey, which one's the single? I'm like, single? What? Well, we want to get something on the radio. Wait, hold on, you said you were doing this for artistic reasons. And I had a similar situation. I was doing Christian music for a while, and I had so many artists telling me, when I would ask them, why are you doing this? They'd say, I'm doing this for Jesus. Great. But some of them were actually doing it because they wanted to have success in music. That's fine too. But be honest about why you're doing it. I think being honest in art is the most important thing. I did so many songs with the Yin Yang Twins. They're some of my favorite people to ever work with. They used to give me a hard time because they just thought that they could intimidate me, or they would say crazy stuff and I wouldn't know what they were saying, and I didn't know what they were saying. They had that weird South Atlanta talk, so they would almost like talking in code. But the thing I liked about those guys is what you see is what you get. There's nothing fake about that whatsoever. And during the time that they were having a lot of hits, I had a lot of other clients hiring me because I'd done these Yin Yang Twin records. So I remember this one guy coming in, and he was trying to do something that sounded like the Yin Yang Twins, but we got in this conversation, and he had a degree in political science or something like that, and I'm really into that stuff, so we started talking about all that, and then we'd stepped outside for a moment, and I saw that he was driving a minivan, and he's got a regular job and a wife and kids, and then I was like, well, I listened to the song again while we're working on it. It was like this club stuff, and I was like, oh, do you go to the clubs much? He's like, nah. I'm like, oh, well, then why are you doing this? He said, well, because that's what's popular, and that's what I think I need to do. And I said, yeah, but that's not who you are. And if you actually had any success with this, then you're going to have to go hang out in a club all the time, and what about your wife and kids? I mean, it's just not going to work, man. It's probably not going to work. Sorry. I think that you need to be who you are, So the Yin Yang Twins, when you look at them, that absolutely is who they are. And through all the years working with those guys, there was never a session where they brought in outside people. There was never like A&R guys or radio people or record people hanging around. It was always, D-Rock, Kane, and Collie Park, and maybe somebody that was helping Collie Park, some sort of, it was mainly just that crew. And it was just fun. It was just fun. It was like a party. And even after they had hits, it was never like they sat around and thought like, oh, we need to have a hit. It was just like them hanging around going, hey, here's an idea. How about if we go boom, 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 boom. That was it. It was just having fun and being real. And I think that's why they had success for so long, because they just kept it real. In conclusion, well, thanks for coming to Studio Stories. I have a few more stories to tell. If you want to check some of them out, go to Freaking Out with Billy Hume. That's my YouTube channel. I've got more stories. I also show some technical stuff, and I do some kind of interview type stuff with different people. So I enjoyed it. Y'all have a good day.